This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. G'day everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. This is our first episode for 2021. I'm Michael Connolly, Managing Director of CPR Group, and joining me as usual is Steve Connolly. G'day Steve, how you doing?
Happy New Year. Yep, great.
Thank
Feeling
you.
awesome after a good bit of time off and a bit of rest and relaxation and hit the ground running for 2021. So really excited to get the ball rolling again on our podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been a lovely summer so far. The weather has been beautiful here we're in Queensland, in southeast Queensland, where so far it's been good. It will get hotter, but it's been fantastic so far. And there's always this kind of calm at this time of year. We love January because even the bit leading up to Christmas and then January, it's typically a bit of a calmer, CALMER, not KARMA, a calmer time because things just tick along a little bit. Everyone's still in holiday mode. We got Australia Day coming up, so people are still looking forward to another long weekend or at least another day off. And so things kind of settle down. We're not in the changeover of seasons. We're not in AGM season. Things are kind of calm, but we want to take this opportunity to tell some really good and interesting stories about what goes on when the typical bush lawyer gets involved in club politics.
Boy, oh boy, do we love the bush lawyer. The only thing we love more than bush lawyers is knowing more than them.
Okay. Yep, that's a good comment. However, in all seriousness, it's probably a little bit different than that. It's probably less that we think we know more than them and more that we know that we don't know everything that there is to know, yet they've forgotten that. So they think they still know everything, and so then what they say, everyone's just got to take it for granted. But what we know, that what we say, we've got to be able to back it up. So we've got to be able to and if somebody says something to us and we don't know the answer, we won't say, no, I'm right because I think I'm right. We'll say, I don't know, and I'll find out. And I don't know whether that's because we're maybe a bit younger than most of the bush lawyers. Not that I'm passing judgment on, I'm not being ageist here. But maybe we should define what we mean by the bush lawyer, because it is a typical Australian term. So How would you define it, Steve?
Oh, someone who's typically informed themselves when it comes to legislative obligations. And let's face it, we're talking about the volunteer world. So, incorporated associations or other not-for-profit entities, and people who may have had a hell of a lot of experience. And, often we do need to acknowledge that, both within their organization that they're involved in now and probably others in the past also. They may have had some professional experience, typically not in a legal sense, but sometimes.
And if it is a legal sense, it's often not the volunteer realm and not for profit legislation.
Yeah, spot on. So people who have also kind of been looked to in their club or association as the holder of all legislative knowledge or relevant knowledge.
So the patriarch or the matriarch.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And the people who will stand up with confidence at any meeting and deliver their ruling on some question, and everyone else just kind of sits down and
he's yelling, so he must be right.
So, and as you say, I suppose the final piece to that puzzle is someone who has, probably developed their knowledge over the course of many years, but many years ago. So they're not necessarily up to date with the most contemporary legal provisions. And as you say, that's what we love so much about our job, is that we're always learning. We're always discovering, new and, dare I say, exciting aspects of incorporation legislation or company legislation that relates to not-for-profits. And that makes our job exciting, but it also means that it's important we acknowledge that we don't and never will know everything.
Yep. Look, I'm going to give you an A for your definition of a bush lawyer, Steve, but I'm going to give you an A+ for your euphemisms in there. Because really what you're trying to say, it's the old asshole who keeps throwing shit around at meetings and people believe them just because they look like they know what they're talking about.
And they're the loudest. That's right.
And loud, bombastic. So that's the type that we're talking about. So an example that I'd like to start with, and to be honest, we've got to be careful here because we are talking about individuals and people become that what we've just defined as the nasty asshole in the room. But to them, they're not. To them, they're doing it with the best of intentions. So there, as you've just alluded to, Steve, those intentions can come across different to other people than they do to those people themselves, because they're acting from a paradigm of 50 years ago sometimes. So I'm thinking about the way it used to be. I'm thinking that I knew the old legislation, or I knew the way we used to operate a long time ago, and they're applying that today. But in all cases, to them, they are doing it for the right reason. So we need to be anonymous in the stories that we tell here to protect those people, because we are making them out to, as others have told us, and as we have seen, their behavior makes them look like that typical asshole. But to them, they're right. But we're also doing it to protect the organizations themselves, because these organizations have been through a rough trot. They've been through a rough trot that has been driven typically by one person. Now, that person often will then go and get support from a cohort of the organization, but it's one person that's driving it and is really the white anter or the underminer who's undoing the work that a new progressive group may be trying to make.
I think that's important also for the volunteers listening, that these people, typically do have good intentions. The people who might be the biggest pain in your ass are often behaving the way they're behaving because they want to make sure the club does everything right, and they want to make sure that, all of the legislative boxes are ticked, and that no one's backside's exposed, for illegal spanking. I really had to be careful about where I went with that.
I'm not exposing my butt for illegal spanking.
Illegal spanking. So, yeah, I think that it's in terms of in terms of keeping a lid on emotions through dealing with someone like this, it's probably important, just as far as mindset goes, to keep that in mind, that they're probably not. Oh, look, sometimes people are a pain in the backside because they enjoy being so. But as we've discussed on this, podcast previously, people generally get involved for the right reasons, and they generally have good intentions and want to, do what's best for their club and for the people making decisions. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with these people, and try and keep a lid on your emotions.
Okay, so that said, with a little caveat or a qualifier, the first story I'd like to tell is one that is fairly recent, and it's actually the catalyst for this. So I received an email as a blind copy from the current president to the previous president that was pretty much a please pull your head in. So after what I think is about 8 or 9 months of trouble, the email I thought was well worded, but it was kind of the final straw. Like, if you don't pull your head in, we're going to have to kick you out because you are making so much trouble. And it was the catalyst that made me realize that this happens so often. And then when you and I discussed it, Steve, we came up with so many stories that really it would be good to get this into the minds of our listeners, so that they are aware that if they are going through any trouble with a bush lawyer, they're not alone, and there are solutions. Yep. So this group took part, and I'll keep everything as high level as I can. They took part in one of our training programs last year where we ran through a whole heap of topics. So one of my favorite ones is the separation of governance from operations, knowing that how we operate is operational, and then our governance that sits behind that is all dealing with the strategy, the overall strategic directions, and our compliance obligations, and that the two are separate, and it takes both to make a really good not-for-profit business. We ran through a whole heap of stuff about meetings, having better meetings, having shorter meetings, having more well-controlled meetings. We ran through stuff about member engagement, using social media, marketing, and a lot of stuff then about governance, and constitutions and other documents was something that this group really focused in on. So they identified through the program that their constitution was well and truly out of date. It was written for context. It's now 2021, and this constitution, 2020 at the time, and this constitution was from 1993. So it's a very old constitution. So they decided to update it. Now, when we go through working with groups to update a constitution, we like to keep less is more. So, in the interests of having that good separation between governance and operations, the operational stuff we prefer to see in bylaws or regulations, and we like to see all of the compliance matters in the constitution. So, if something relates to how we need to deal with an issue that arises at the AGM, boom, that'll be in the constitution, and it needs to be clear. But if something arises for how do we deal with, for instance, sideline behaviour of parents, that's an operational matter that can be dealt with in a policy or in a policy manual, member protection, all of which can be included in bylaws or regulations or separate documents, but not necessarily in the constitution because they serve different purposes. But because this is a small group, they wanted one document. So, against what I would think is the best way to do it, they did it having everything in the one document. So they wanted it to be more about operations so that it was more about them. And it was one document that covered everything. So that made it quite a bit longer, but it was really well researched. And the group that was writing it, so the subcommittee group that was writing it, led by the president, took lots of advice from, because it's Queensland, it's governed by the Office of Fair Trading, which is part of the Department of Justice and Attorney General here. So he was taking a lot of advice and testing things as they went. And so while it was long and while it covered things that I thought would have been better elsewhere, it did a good job. So the Constitution was drafted and then presented to members, and everyone was happy except one bloke. This one
the
bloke,
Bush lawyer.
the Bush lawyer. He did a fantastic job, Ben, drumming up negative support. So he created a group of people, and he didn't have to really be right. He just had to be scary enough. He just had to sow enough seeds of doubt so that they wouldn't get the resolution passed by a majority of 75% because it's a special resolution. That's all he needed to do. And none of that needed to be based in 2020 facts. It was still based in, it could still be just be based in what he's reading on the internet and then sprouting some information, or his career. And, I'm big and scary.
And those other members who are having that fear instilled in them are very unlikely to go and do the research themselves. They're very unlikely to go and look at the legislation or call, in this case, the Office of Fair Trading and seek guidance, which even if you do
test anything.
Yeah, that's right. And so what that means is that this person has really, free reign over what they say, and people are either going to believe them or just be scared enough to, not vote in the positive for adoption of the Constitution and undermine the whole process.
Exactly. Yep. So now he, in his regular and excruciatingly painfully long correspondence to the entire membership, like seriously, emails to the entire membership, pages and pages of this just drivel, he would very regularly remind everyone about how his former career, he's retired now, how his former career saw him doing all of this stuff that, I know my stuff because this is what I used to do. And so he knew and knows everything. So he kicked up a massive stink about it. He was initially against adopting the new constitution, but it still got up because they went through a process that worked. And when we get to the end, we'll talk about the sorts of solutions that you can apply so that you can still achieve what you're after. It was against then the calling of the AGM because it was still, there was that gap between having the new constitution passed and having it actually formally adopted. And so then it being enacted. And so he was just banging on about all of this stuff about how it's all wrong and all terrible. Now, so, and when you read his emails, it's just fact, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and written from one perspective. Now, when I read it, I'm going, well, that's not right. Well, that's not right. Well, that used to be right, but it's no longer right. That's just an incorrect interpretation. Oh, that's actually a deliberate incorrect interpretation of that element of the legislation.
Hey, can I coin a new term for people like this right now? Can we call them a factwit?
Okay, I'll let you do that. I'm going to be careful about my usage of that term.
Yeah.
But this factwit was, wait for it, the old president.
So was he the previous president and had this new president who was kind of spearheading the Constitution Review working group only relatively green in the position? Had he only taken over in the last 12 months?
About that, a little bit long. 12 months from the time, yes.
Okay.
And there was a contested election, and the new guy beat
Oh,
the old guy.
oh, juicy. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And Steve, this guy was president for decades. In fact, he was president for so long that he's the one who wrote the Constitution 27 years
Oh,
ago.
okay. So we've got several motives for being a dick here. So
Yep.
everything I said earlier about people, having good intentions, it sounds like this guy was an exception to that
No,
rule.
he still had good intentions. Just ask
Okay.
him. Ask him.
Right. Yeah.
So the thing is that, and this is what's fascinating about this. So he was protecting it. So really, the
Okay.
psychology is
Yeah.
what's important here. He was claiming stuff. As I said, some of it I think he was deliberately misinterpreting legislation
Okay.
and trying to get his point across because he was trying to stay with the old constitution because he knew it was right. And it was right, was being the operative word here.
Yep.
1993 is almost 3 decades ago for when
Yeah.
this change was being made. So a lot had changed in that time, legislatively and operationally. In 1993, Steve, this club didn't have an email address. Email existed, there was an internet, but this club didn't have either an email or an internet yet. So the world has changed. This club didn't have a social media presence because there was no Facebook, there was no MySpace yet. But the psychology here is that people get involved in their roles, as we've talked about before, for whatever reason motivated them to say yes to being on a committee, but they take a position. So I'm here for the best interest of this organization. I'm taking this position. They take that position and then they defend that position. And often they're defending the position because the position is so connected to them. So this guy, his position is the old constitution is right, the new constitution is wrong. The new constitution is wrong because it's not the old constitution, and the old constitution in this case is me. I'm protecting me. I'm protecting what I wrote. So he defended that position really just to save his own face so that he keeps looking strong. Then people, and now this guy was able to put his finger on things quite quickly because he knew where to go to the act and the regulation, and then the things like the Acts Interpretation Act. But then so typically what bush lawyers will do is they will go onto the internet and they will get into their echo chamber, finding information that supports their position. But just like a bad scientist, they will completely ignore everything that is the position opposite to what they're saying. So they find only evidence to support what they're saying and ignore all of the evidence to the contrary, focusing only on, in these sorts of cases, really, it's just the crap that supports their position.
And the human brain is programmed to do just that, to forget and ignore things that don't back up our own point of view. So this is actually how we're made, so it's understandable that people other than scientists might fall into that trap, but it's then a matter, isn't it, of helping that person to save face and to achieve the right outcome at the same time, because it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. That person feeling as though they've had a win, and the club are actually having a win as well.
Yep. So something that we've come across is that when you've got situations like this where there are massive changes that need to be made because of old rules and new rules, and
it's not that
legislative
anyone's done
changes.
the wrong thing or that constitution has always had shortcomings. It's just that things have changed, and the world changes, like you say, a lot over 30 odd years. So it's actually okay for and it's the right thing. It's the diligent thing for an organization to be making sure that they're keeping up to date with good contemporary business practice as well as legislation.
Exactly. Yeah. And as you're going through that change, you can also have what we call transitionary provisions in a constitution as well.
Yeah. And that's often a question that we get asked. And obviously every situation is different, but a review of a constitution is a really good opportunity to look at how things are happening today in an organization. And, like was probably the case in this club, if we haven't had a long, hard look at how we're doing things in almost 30 years, there are probably some efficiencies that we can introduce into, our day-to-day operations. So certainly when we review a constitution, we don't just look at, the facts that need to get included into the constitution. We look more broadly and say, well, what does your management committee look like? How many positions do you have on that committee? What sort of subcommittee structure do you have? Because it's a great opportunity, should there need to be any newer provisions included in the Constitution that you can do that. But often what that means is that people get confronted not only by the fact that we're going to have a new constitution and there might be people for a whole host of reasons that are attached to the old one, but if we're going to make structural change at the same time, we often have people pushing back and fearing that they're going to lose power, or authority within the organization's operating structure, and they then they then attack the Constitution as the easy thing to attack because of the fear of losing decision-making power or their position on the board or a subcommittee's right to operate autonomously. And this is something that often comes up when we work with a particular type of sporting organization. I might be careful here and not say the sport, but in this sport, we see a lot of clubs that operate the way that they've operated for a long time. And often we have...
Does that have to do with the demographic of participants?
Maybe. Again, not that we're being ageist, but probably more that they've been doing it for a very long time. So their attachment to the way of doing things has grown over a long time. So therefore, it's harder for them to comprehend that something needs to change. So we often see subcommittees that operate with far too much autonomy. There must be a reasonable degree of oversight in incorporated associations, typically by the management.
And you're saying that because ultimately, regardless of what that subcommittee does, because that's only a subcommittee, it's going to be the management committee members who are accountable for anything that goes wrong.
Exactly. So they've got to know what the subcommittee are doing. There's got to be regular reports. If there's money being handled by the subcommittee, then that obviously has to be accounted on the financial statements of the entire organization.
Yeah. Which is the legal entity.
The legal entities, it's the legal entity's money. It's not just the subcommittee's money. And sometimes these are some really confronting things for the members of those subcommittees who've been operating that way for, as I said, a long time.
But we've always done it like this, Steve.
So
it must be right.
And so often, don't we come up against that? Well, hold on, we've done this forever. We've done this since 1993. So it must be okay to do it. So we then have the additional challenge of dealing with that. Often it's really easy to make that argument because we say it's simply we can't go on. Our job is to come in and identify the things that you're doing really well and to identify the things that can be improved upon, but it's also to identify things that aren't in line with the legislation. And if that's the case, we're going to tell you really clearly, and there's kind of no two ways about it. But often that can undermine the Constitution review process.
Yeah.
And if you add to that, a bush lawyer on a subcommittee that you're looking to rein in terms of their autonomy, you can have scare tactics enacted. And recently we had an experience where a subcommittee was disbanded because the members of it wanted to do things their way and weren't doing as they were told by the management committee. So those subcommittee members had a lawyer write a really scary letter to the management committee, and we had to hold the hand of the management committee members through dealing with that, because just because someone has a lawyer write you a letter doesn't mean that they're right, doesn't mean that that lawyer has experience in this particular area even. So it's...
And just because they demand an explanation doesn't give you
mean
an
that they
obligation to provide that explanation.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So again, any scary legal letters come your way in relation to disbanding subcommittees, give us a call. But it does sometimes complicate the Constitution review process if we're looking to take the good opportunity to make structural change at the same time.
Yes. So it's funny the tactics that people take to do that behind the scenes undermining of what's going on as well. But it's often the scare tactics. So you mentioned the lawyer letter, so the solicitor's letter. But there's many, many tactics. And there's another example. Now, I'm happy to give the sport away for this one. This is netball. And this is an older example, but things don't change, But these types of people exist in lots of places. And it's not the same person, and people don't arrive there deliberately. They just get so attached to their position that they turn into somebody who becomes obstropolous and becomes very difficult for the management committee to deal with. So we were going through changing an old constitution to update it. And there were some significant changes that needed to be made because operations of this association had changed so much. And they were finding that they weren't acting in line with what the constitution said because the constitution was wrong. So rather than stick with the wrong constitution, they were doing what's right. But it was time to bring their operations, bring the constitution in line with their operations, all in line with recent, at that time, changes to the legislation. So everything was fine. But the Bush lawyer in this case was a Life member who did exactly the same thing. She did that undermining. She went and garnered support, building negative support against the position. What was so terrible about this case is that she did such a good job that she had even converted people who were on the management committee of the association. Now, these people on the management committee were involved through the process. They had invested probably collectively 200 or 300 hours in getting this right. And it's not just in the time spent with me working on the actual document. It was in the time that they had been informing themselves. They had been talking to people. It was a long time, over many, many months, that they'd spent building the model that was right so that it would see them really strongly move into the future as well. But this Life member went and undermined the process so badly that the end result was that they threw the baby out with the bathwater. All she wanted, realistically, was a couple of little changes. And in this case, it was to retain the voting rights of Life members. Fine. But don't throw the whole constitution out. So almost a decade later, they're still operating with the same shitty.
Oh, you're kidding.
Because that process, and then they were gun shy, unfortunately. And you should have seen that the other people on the committee just turned to the people who'd voted against it, saying, you sat here with us going through this. You had every opportunity to raise those concerns and we could have made those changes. And now you're going to let the whole thing fail, even to the point of these minor changes. And this Life member sitting in the AGM saying, nope, you can't change anything now. You can't change anything now. You can't change anything now. It's got to fail. It's got to fail. It's got to fail. You know, needing a 75% majority, they only got to something like 68, 69. So it was close, but it was just that undermining, nasty. And then, like I said, baby out with the bathwater.
And luckily, that most of the time that doesn't happen, does it? Most of the time people do see reason, but that's a really good example of a crappy outcome just because of someone's, personal desire to have the Constitution reflect, what they think is the right operating model.
One final example that I want to give is a little bit different, and it's how these people can behave in public. So what we've talked about so far is behaving in the confines of our own organization. But there's one guy that we're dealing with at the moment who is a real antagonist. Now, he does have a little bit of knowledge, and unfortunately, the majority of that knowledge is from the internet and from the echo chamber, where he's just listening to other people having the same arguments against legislation. But his behavior is appalling in that when he's sending the nasty emails to every member, again, heaven knows how he bloody got the membership database, because that's not okay, because he's not actually a committee member, but he's sending it to the entire, so, there's bad stuff going on there. But he's sending these emails to the entire membership database, but doing stupid, and they're just whinging emails, and then CCing council, who, by their good grace, give us access to facilities for a peppercorn amount of money. He's sending it to their insurance company and their insurance broker. He's CCing the bloody Attorney General. Now, do you really think the Attorney General gives a shit about what he's whinging about? Of course not. But the downside of this is not only is he disenfranchising himself within their own membership base, but how do you think that makes them look in public?
Yeah.
And these are really stupid group. Then they get a grant application from them to say, I don't think so, because I don't want to see this organization, this dude going to the press whinging about how they've misspent grant money. No, thanks. What an idiot.
Yeah.
And he's got no idea that that's what he's doing.
We're talking about such important external stakeholders that you really don't want to portray a crappy image to. You want to present a picture to council of a fantastic organization that has a great culture and does everything to the letter of the law, but also maintains good operating practice. And people undermining that publicly doesn't result in great outcomes for clubs. That's really disappointing.
Quite the opposite, in fact. Yes.
What a dickhead. And he just makes himself look like an idiot.
I know, but yes, no, just ask him, and he looks like he smells
Yeah.
of roses and sugar plum fairies. It being just after Christmas, I can use a Tchaikovsky reference. Right. So, what's the solution? I reckon that there are some really clear steps, and I reckon that you're probably on exactly the same page as me on this one, Steve. So, step one, I reckon, is engage. Engage early
Yep.
and engage personally. How do you take that one?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I even go one step further when I'm talking with a club that's entering the constitution review or rewrite process. I say, if there's any people, and typically they'll chuckle when I say this because someone comes immediately to their mind. Anyone in the club who you know might cause a bit of trouble through the process, get them involved from the outset, get them on your working group so that they are unable down the track to throw mud at the process. They can't undermine the process if they were, you know,
Party to it.
yeah, that's right, involved firsthand. So, and the other consideration is that often those people do possess, as you say, a little bit of knowledge, but the constitution rewrite process and being involved in that working group, particularly when we're involved in it, brings about a great opportunity for education. So it's a really good chance for that person to get a bit of a refresher and an update on what the modern obligations of a not-for-profit actually look like.
Yeah, the interesting thing that you're saying there, Steve, is that we're looking for a way to help those people save face. And saving face has a bit of a negative connotation to it. Oh, we're
Yep.
just trying to save face. Actually, people's face is really important to them. And like you just said, and this is critical to go back to the points you made at the top about the motivation of people and how it often is very noble. That if we can make that motivation positive rather than going and getting all of that negative support, then all of the good stuff that they've still got in mind and the good contributions
Yep.
that we will still capitalize on those, or we'll still be
Yeah.
able to benefit from the good stuff. We're not going to lose the opportunity to have them help us grow into the future. If we just kick them to the outside and say, no, 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 you're old, you're an asshole, we don't want you anymore, that's when it's likely to, and rightly so, that they'll get their back up and they'll become that nasty bush lawyer that causes trouble. Then I think that if that doesn't work, so if they won't engage, and look, the reason that I'm saying this is when you give that example, I'm sure you see the look on people's faces when you say, I think that you need to engage with those nasty people. It's not a look of saying, oh yeah, that'll be an easy job, I'm going to really enjoy that. It's quite the opposite. They go,
Oh yeah, it's fear.
what?
Yeah.
But can't I just put a comment on Facebook and then just
Yeah.
send an email to all members and say, please be nice? No, it's engaging personally and it's engaging with them. And
Yep.
it's giving them the knowledge that all of that great experience and great skills that they've got and then their old knowledge we want to bring with us and we want to capitalize on it. We want to make the most of having them involved.
Yep.
If that doesn't work, but give that a red hot crack because that is ultimately the most successful and going to be sustainable solution. And you might head off at the pass the next time that they were going to be nasty if you can create an ally out of them. But if that doesn't work, then this is a political game. So if you are
Yeah.
making something like a constitutional change where you need a 75% majority, then
Yep.
it is politics. So go and politic it. Go and work out how you can get the support that you need if the other side is getting the support that they think that they need. And obviously, and this is a last resort, there are procedures where you can remove people from the committee if they're a committee member, or indeed from membership if they're a member. And so the example we talked about at the top, that was the final threat made to the former president. You are now undermining all of the good work that we're doing. And the emails that you're sending to everyone, they're unwelcome from all of those on the committee. And I speak for the committee because we've just recently had a meeting about it where this was a resolution that was passed that I write to you on this basis. But I'm sure that the other members are probably getting pissed off as well. It's not the stuff that they want to be reading. And how good does it make their organization look? How good does it make our, being yours and my, running of this organization look if this is how we're bickering and you're dragging this out in public? So that's just not okay. So then there is an option to remove them.
Yeah.
But I think
and all too often, as we've discussed previously, all too often that power is not exercised and it goes on for so long that person causing the trouble actually leads really good people to leave the club.
Yeah.
And committees need to act confidently when when something's gone on, like obviously the couple of examples that you've given, particularly that, past president, when they've gone on for long enough and they've caused enough frustration, and people don't get involved in a club to get emails from a past president undermining the actions of the committee.
No.
That just fosters a really crappy club culture.
Mm.
So don't stand for it as a committee. Act, confidently and with solidarity as a decision-making group, and don't be fearful of the ramifications if you've got good reason to be calling someone to account.
And look, you've just nailed it. It is confidence. It all comes down to having the confidence. That's something, though, that you can work at. You can be listening to this while you're driving along or out having a jog and thinking, but I don't have that confidence and I'll never have that confidence. No. It's a skill. So being confident in your job as a volunteer, particularly as a committee member, is like anything else that you've spent time mastering. If you're a welder, then I'm sure that you're as bad at welding when you started as I am now. If you're a musician, you were as bad the first time you picked up the flute, the oboe, the clarinet, the violin, the guitar, whatever it is, as most people are. We all don't have the skills. It takes time to master those skills.
Yep.
And being a great committee member is exactly the same. But there are shortcuts that you can take. So all of the experience that, well, certainly that you and I have seen people have, Steve, we're happy to share that. That's why we do this. We're happy to share that. So if you feel that you need that assistance to gain that confidence, don't do it alone. Just pick up the phone, send us an email, contact us via our website. You will be able to get through it. You will be able to understand what makes people tick and then be able to engage with them better. And this is exactly what we do. So we're not making this up. This is born in a lot of experience, not quite 27 years of experience.
And we really enjoy it too, because what we're able to do most of the time is to take a lot of this pain away from the process and to hold the hand of the people who are doing the right thing and modernizing, a constitution or ensuring compliance of an organization's operations, and therefore enter into this process in a really positive and noble way. We want to avoid those people being made to feel as though they're doing the wrong thing, or breaking any laws or running the risk of getting a fine.
Absolutely, Steve. So if, as a listener, you're not yet subscribed to our newsletter, make sure that you do so via our homepage on our website. Follow us on social media. And, of course, all of our contact details are available on the contact link on our website. And as Steve just said, we would love an opportunity to talk with you through any of your problems and to provide any assistance that we can. Steve, as always, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you again.
Right back at you. See ya.